Hello, and thank you for joining us for the final edition of our Spectrum series, this time focusing on reimbursement solutions. We have a great guest here today, Jeremy Della Penta. He is the Director of Service Delivery and Engagement here at Nova. He has more than 15 years of combined FSA, HRA administration, medical benefits, and banking knowledge. And he also has 24 years of operations and process management experience through different companies as well as Nova. Jeremy recognizes that Nova isn't a building, it's people. So in his role as Director of Service Delivery and Engagement, he is responsible for day-to-day operations, but also managing and supporting the design, implementation, evaluation of programs that facilitate professional development and continuous learning of our team members, including our leadership team and our emerging leaders. Jeremy ensures the department's manager and supervisory team members maintain service level metrics related to customer service engagement and quality assurance. And he is also our in-house expert on all things reimbursement. I've been in the health coverage and benefits industry for over a decade with broad knowledge of regulations, compliance, and products. And prior to working in healthcare benefits, I did spend a dozen years working as a communications professional in state government. And with that, we're going to get into a little bit more of the details around our webinar today. This is sponsored by Nova Healthcare. We've been around for 40 years, providing an array of services for medical, dental, vision, COBRA, reimbursement account administration, private label partnerships, direct primary care, level funding, and reference-based pricing. So that's Nova in a nutshell. And today we are going to talk about the final band on our spectrum of health plan performance management opportunities. If you've attended any of the others in the series, this may seem familiar to you. We like to conceptualize how we talk about benefits as the white light being the company profile, all of your information and insights about your clients that come into the prism, which is the TPA partner, that being Nova. And then that light refracts out into all these different creative solutions, all these options, all these things that can actually at times sometimes be overwhelming. Network, telehealth, wellness, medical management, pharmacy management, benefit design tiers, and today focusing on reimbursement, the final in our rainbow band. So there are really three things we want to look at here in this reimbursement solutions spectrum. We're going to start talking a little bit about FSAs. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on what an FSA is. I think a lot of people are really familiar with those. It's where employees can set aside pre-tax funds for a variety of expenses like dependent care, adoption, prescription eyewear, things like that. In the middle, we have the HRA, which is owned and entirely funded by the employer, used for eligible expenses. That is a tax deduction for the employer, not for the employee, which is different from the HSA, which we're going to talk about next. And the HRA can be combined with the FSA. The HSA is one where employees can contribute funds pre-tax and the unused funds roll over into future years and can also be used as a retirement aid. And the employer can also contribute to the HSA. So you can see how in the spectrum there's a little bit of a mix of who contributes what and when. So this all seems a little confusing, right? It's a lot of letters to keep track of. So we wanted Jeremy here to talk through how we can help employers really make strategic decisions around which option is really the best for your health plan. So let's say that you're an employer and you want to offer a high deductible health plan to lower the cost of providing coverage, which of course is expensive. So what can an employer do, Jeremy, to build a plan that doesn't scare their employees away, but also allows them to manage costs?
Yeah, that's $1 million question, right? That's the one that I wish if every employer on earth could have access to this WebEx, they would actually dig in and kind of absorb this entire thing. The number one thing I think is going to be engagement coupled with some form of an education. We do find that the vast majority of the calls that we receive through either client services or even through customer service, whether it's an employer or it's an employee, is these moments that they didn't realize that the benefit did this, or that they were never explained this, or they these pieces that they shouldn't have known. And I will go out there and I'll say that anyone that goes out and says that this is a simple process, it's really not. So that's why I'm hoping that through this, even the Spectrum series, it's going to be a little bit more educational and give them a foundation to start working towards, so to speak, with that. So let's talk a little bit about it. Next slide, please. Okay, so based on what we offer, and I know a lot of other companies offer tax favored benefits as well. But of these three, so we have FSA, HRA, and HSA, as Teresa had mentioned, and there's different ownership, so to speak. And I say ownership sort of in a quotation because it is something that typically flows through the employer. But ownership as it relates to maybe who's investing what money, where the tax savings comes from, and again, there's variations of that. FSA, again, just to kind of take a little bit of a step back, FSA is something that you typically elect. There are nuances, there are little opportunities for an employer to potentially put money into an FSA, but there are different rules for that. So primarily, we'll say it's money that you decide to elect based on what you think you're going to spend, whether it's going to be medical, pharmacy, vision, dental. But that is, again, something that you say, I'm going to have this much taken out, and it's usually there's a cap on it as it relates to what the IRS says on that. The HRA is employer money, and it's typically covered with it's coupled, I should say, with a high deductible plan. Doesn't have to be, and there are variations that are out there. I see HRAs and different expenses through an HRA. That is not something that again, an employee puts money into or elects, but it is with you at least for that particular plan year as you're employed. And then you have the HSA, which can be a combination of both your election and your contribution is what they call it, and your employer's contribution to that, and that's portable. That is something that you can take to another organization, or if you get to a point where you retire, which is awesome, then that goes with you. It doesn't stay with the employer, so you have a little bit of an advantage there.
Yeah, it seems like there's a spectrum of options within this band of the spectrum for what fits the employer's needs. Maybe even an FSA can even be paired with more of a lower deductible plan to cover some of those things like childcare or adoption, which wouldn't necessarily be covered under a health plan. So you can actually have multiple depending on what your needs are.
Yep, and yeah, there's creativity. I mean, you can get what they call limited purpose or a limited expense flexible spending account that couples with an HSA. So you usually don't have an FSA, full-blown FSA and an HSA in the same space, but you can do a limited purpose that'll cover maybe your vision or your dental, or your HSA is going to cover those medical expenses, so to speak.
So as you said, it's simple, but it's kind of not. It's very straightforward, but there's a lot of decision points. So
yeah, there's coffee and water.
Questions, concerns that come up so that we can understand how to help our clients walk through them. So most common scenario, the employer offers a traditional copay plan, but they also have as an option a high deductible plan paired with an HSA. So say your traditional copay plan has a higher monthly premium, maybe the HDHP has no premium as a way to balance out some of the costs, induce people to choose that plan. The copays would be the same, but of course the high deductible health plan has a high deductible. So how would an employee even decide which one to choose, and how would an employer help them walk through that?
Yeah, this one I'm actually really passionate about to talk about the employer engagement. So I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the idea behind all of this is really to have your employer get engaged with the employee base. And what I mean by that is, if you're an organization that maybe, you typically hire maybe students or, in other words, you're paying a little bit over minimum wage or maybe minimum wage. Maybe it's a situation that, you pay a higher amount, but they're they're the source of income for a larger family or whatever, not to the degree that you can find out how your employee base is. That is really going to be key as to how palatable some of these decisions are to go forward. And what I mean by that is, if, for an example, let's say you have someone that is sort of, they're the ones who are on the lower scale, we'll say, as far as wages are concerned. And understandably, a lot of organizations, they don't have a lot of money to invest in a lot of different areas. So you do want to offer a high deductible plan, maybe even a copay plan. And I can assure you that based on conversation, so I'm not saying that every survey that's out there is going to have this, but just on this, for the years that I've been in this industry, so let's say close to 20 years, and the conversations I've had with both employers and employees, and given the existing, we'll call it inflation, or the current financial environment that we're in, people will ultimately look at maybe their high deductible plan and say, hey, there's no cost here. So I'm going to go this direction, but maybe you as an organization are funding $1,500 towards that $3,000 family deductible, but you're spreading it over 26 weeks. And over 26 weeks, that's maybe $57 or $58. And if you're in a position where you're like, I have to make a choice where my $100 or $200 is of my contribution has to go somewhere, a lot of time people are like, I'm going to put that into gas so I can even make it to work. And they may be in a position where, I don't know that I'm even going to go to the doctor because of the fact that, my doctor visit might be around 200 or $250. And if I'm only getting 57 or $58 every 2 weeks, it's going to take me 2 to 3 months to actually even pay for that bill, so to speak. So it's not really for everyone, but at the same time, you might have 90% that this is going to be really, really great. Um, so again, engage with your employees. You might even have somebody, for example, we have early adopters, and one thing that Nova does internally really well is we evangelize. And what I mean by that is we have individuals that may pick up an HSA plan for the first time. It's a high deductible plan. It's coupled with an HSA. They look at it and say, okay, what are my options? And I'll go through sort of a high level idea of how to figure out where you're at, but they take it and they say, okay, well, this is great. And I can tell you, just yes, I am a director of that area, but I have had all throughout my tenure, when I picked up that high deductible with an HSA, people will come to me and give me, say, how has it worked for you? And I will be the first person to say, well, this is how I did it, and it's worked perfectly, year after year, perfectly. And there are times, and HSA has flexibility where if it works for you to contribute for 6 months, and you decide things are going to start getting tight and I really want that extra money, so to speak. It is taxable income, but let's say you stop contributing to your HSA and you need money for gas or utilities or whatever that looks like, then you can actually stop it. And it does have that kind of flexibility. But what I want to do is I want to take a step towards sort of a general idea for both employees and employers in a form of a calculation, just to kind of give a feel. So what I did is I took some real numbers. The reality is there are some plans out there, and again, they've ranged. Premiums range between copay and high deductible. So even high deductible plans sometimes have a premium. So I'm going to be semi-generic in this, but real numbers. So let's just arguably say it's about $340, $344 a month for a copay plan. So it is coming out again pre-tax. Most of the time, 99% of the time is pre-tax, and that's a totally different discussion. But let's say it comes out pre-tax, right? So 344 times 12, it's about $4,100 a year. Is coming out of your paycheck for copay plans. Now what's the benefit? You may find you're the family that has a ton of expenses. Unfortunately, you might have one of those situations where you do need high expense or high spend every month, and a copay plan is just, it's cutting your losses. I might pay $344 a month. I may pay $30 in copays a month, but my normal expenses are pretty high, and that's okay. Now, for those that may not fit into that category or just kind of on the fence to figure it out, let's look at what it does look like on an HSA plan. Let's assume, and it is an assumption, but let's assume that your employer is not going to fund your HSA or your deductible in full of your $3,000, but they're going to give you $1,500 up front. What you can do is you can take a look at that 344 and say, well, normally I would be spending $4,100, but I'm gonna actually lower that a little bit to maybe $300. So that 44 again puts it right back in. It is taxable, but you're saving that 44 right off the bat. Okay, so maybe close to $500. In the meantime, you're getting $3,600 throughout the year is going to go towards that gap, so to speak, that $1,500 between the HSA money you were given and hitting that high deductible where your copays start to kick in. So 1,500 of that 3,600 is going to be allocated for whatever expenses you need medically throughout that year. If you never get to that place, maybe that 1,500 stays there. Maybe you decide you do spend up to that 3,000, and that 1,500 you put in there. You decide later that you're going to take some of that money, you're going to reimburse yourself at the end of the year, so you kind of wait to get that like lump sum. Or you spend all that money, and now you still have that balance between the 3,600 and that 1,500 you put right into the HSA. And let's just say you decide to re-enroll next year because you didn't have too many expenses or whatever that circumstance is. You have your next year deductible covered, that 1,500, and you still have money left over where you can use it for copays and different expenses. Not only that, you have tax savings, and as far as your gross income is concerned, and we actually do provide a couple different areas for tax calculation, on the slide if you happen to be watching, so not a bad idea to take a look just to give you a general idea. But I did want to probably bring that up there so people understand that, you can still save money from a copay plan. You still can be totally protected within that deductible. It's not as scary. It's there. reality is it's there. And then even if you do hit that $3,000, you're in a copay situation and you have a pot of money you could put towards that copay amount. And you decide if something happens, you go to another job, that money goes with you. So it's not left at the employer, and you decide to pick up another copay, or, another high deductible plan at another location, or your other employer. That money is with you. Or if you decide to take a copay plan, you can use that money towards copays. So just give you a kind of a general idea of the benefit. Again, I'm sort of an evangelist about it because I've done it for a while, but I can tell you that we went from a very small percentage of adopters to a very large percentage in our organization, and it didn't have to come from HR. It came from the people that are actually doing it.
Yeah, I mean, the investment option too is something that I don't think really gets talked about enough, but you can actually
Sure.
set a set point beyond which your contributions go automatically into an investment account, and that builds over time. So that way, when you retire, if you have healthcare expenses, things Medicare won't pay for, even long-term care, in some cases, even specialized cases, some housing is covered through your HSA over the long term. So it's really a mental shift from thinking about it as your annual healthcare benefit to thinking about it as more of a lifetime health benefit and an investment in what you need for your health overall. But of
Yep.
course, because
100%.
it's a pre-tax account, we do have the issue of the IRS sometimes comes knocking on your door saying, did you spend this money appropriately? We gave you a tax benefit. Did you spend it right? So when someone is asked to provide substantiation, I know that can be pretty scary for the employee to say, oh no, what do I need to provide? Can you talk through a little bit about what people should be saving when they're in an HSA situation so that they have the substantiation for the future?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a couple of different versions of it, but to your point, the IRS wants to make sure that if you're getting tax savings, you're using it appropriately, the benefit appropriately. The interesting thing about HSA is it's what they would consider, and I'll put this in quotes too, is self-report. So same documentation applies as far as what you want to keep with you. The difference is at the end of the year when you do an HSA and you have a tax advisor, as it relates to like payment penalties and things like that, or proof of, so to speak, you do want to keep those documents with you. You self-report. On the FSA and the HRA side, though, usually it's your administrator that's going to do that. So your administrator is going to take sort of the claims administration role and to make sure that it's meeting certain criteria. Some of the normal eligible expenses under what they call IRS code section, the 213D eligible expenses, that is something like, for example, we have over-the-counter healthcare items. So you might have, let's say, sunscreen. Well, sunscreen is not going to go through your medical insurance. So even if your medical insurance is with a parent company or you receive some sort of a file, you're not going to have sunscreen on that. So we might require some additional information to make sure it hits that minimum SPF that's designated by the IRS as eligible. OTC medicines, your Advil, your Tylenols, and different allergy medicines, things along those lines. Those are things that we would need some proof of to make sure that that's what you're purchasing. And as it relates to maybe some of those things that are in a medical system, we would accept things like explanations of benefits that shows you are the patient or whoever your eligible dependent is, how much was actually your liability versus what the provider, billed, things like that. We also will take itemized receipts that do that. So it doesn't have to be an EOB. It can be itemized receipts that give that same information. And the prescription side of things too, most of that is done, if you have a debit card, that's done almost automatically. Literally 99.9% of transactions are automatically approved by hitting certain criteria. But in the event maybe your card's not available or whatnot, we might ask for some information from the pharmacy themselves that might have your name and what the prescription was. So it's relatively simple, but it still goes back into that employer and HR engaging with their individuals to know here's the dirty side of the reimbursement accounts. But once you're prepared, it's a no-brainer. You're not shocked to see that this letter shows up that threatens to turn cards off, or letter shows up that says this big word substantiation that's really intimidating. This is really what we're looking for. We're doing our best to make sure your money's protected, the employer's money is protected, and that you can continue to have a tax savings so your bottom line actually saves you money.
Right. And the other piece of education I think that is important, that going beyond substantiation, is also how these benefits can change over the course of the year. So we saw through the COVID pandemic that they would make changes to add in things like your N95s would be covered through your HSA or your FSA. So we also, and any good administrator can also serve as a point of education or clarification for what is actually covered. They changed some of the OTC things that were covered. feminine hygiene care products started to be covered over the course of the year. So you really do need a good partner administrator to walk you through things like substantiation, eligible expenses, and navigating all of these things. So, you know, this is what we talk about at NOVA too. It's really important to understand the tolerance for change within your organization. Like Jeremy said, understanding your demographics, understanding the wage profile of your workers. Are you really putting an undue burden on them? You know, in the name of cutting expenses, is there a way you can manage that better? Really engaging in good conversations to improve plan performance and overall health outcomes. You don't want to have savings in your premium dollar only to lose money in your overall health outcomes over the long term. So that is actually a wrap for our entire Spectrum series. Jeremy, thank you for being the capstone of our wonderful 7-part series. If you missed any of these previous episodes, you can always check them out on our YouTube channel. We will have those available for on-demand watch whenever you are interested. If you have any further questions, you can always reach out to NOVA, and we are happy to help you with your questions about reimbursement or any of the other bands in the spectrum. And thank you to those of you that made it through all 7 parts of the series. Thank you to any newcomers that came along, just because there's a lot of interest in making reimbursement make a little bit more sense. And with that, thank you for participating, and we look forward to seeing you for the next series.